Welcome to CBS 8. We're sitting down with the mayoral candidates in the race to become the city of San Diego's next mayor. Currently joining me right now is the current mayor, Todd Gloria. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Carlo.
We're doing a little conversation. We spoke to your opponent, Larry Turner, giving you the same basic topics, about 5 minutes on each topic. Wanted to keep it simple so that we can just give people who are in our audience the broad strokes of some of the biggest issues impacting them. The first one today, we want to start off with San Diego, as you know, is one of the most expensive cities to live in the United States. What can you do as mayor, what will you do as mayor to bring the cost down for people who want to rent a home in San Diego and people who want to buy a home in San Diego?
It's a great question. I'm glad that you know that this is the top of mind concern. The most important thing a mayor can do is help increase the amount of supply. Housing, we have underproduced housing for decades, and that has resulted in our population in my lifetime from the late 1970s to now doubling to 1.4 million people, but our housing production has been reduced by about 2/3. That is a perfect recipe for homelessness and for very unaffordable homes, both for rent and for purchase. What can we do about that? Well, we can do what I've been doing the last couple of years, which is to improve our policies, make things like granny flats and studio apartments and other things more accessible, to hold our staff accountable. I've issued 2 executive orders to speed up housing production. What we used to permit in months or years is now being done in 30 days or less. What that's resulted in, Carlo, is in 2022, the city permitted about 5,000 new homes. Last year, we did nearly 10,000 new homes. That increase in inventory is already starting to show leveling off of rent growth, and in some places, rent's going down. It's the most impactful way that I can reduce the cost of living in San Diego, and that's in addition to pushing back against unnecessary water rate increases, injecting some competition into our electric utility, and opposing things like the road user charge.
In that push to create more housing inventory, there are consequences to policy decisions. One of those is we're seeing in single-family home neighborhoods, people who they've invested their life and their money in those homes and their neighborhoods. They're seeing units, apartments basically being built next door to them, 17 units in one case with no parking. What do you say to those people who are neighbors to something like that?
Yeah, this change is difficult. I don't minimize that in the least. But the change that comes from doing nothing is actually worse. It looks like rampant homelessness, thousands of people living outdoors. It looks like your kids and your grandkids moving out of state because they don't see a future for themselves here. What we've tried to do is do smart policy that says we're not going to build anything anywhere, but that we're going to focus this new housing in the places where the communities can handle it, where the infrastructure is there, where it's closest to transit, where it's closest to jobs, where it's closer to opportunity. Carlo, a lot of the housing in recent years has been focused in just a handful of neighborhoods, far from the opportunities that allow families to grow and to thrive. What we've said is that, yes, we need to ask more communities to do more, but we'll do it in sustainable ways. And generally speaking, we're not talking about towers. What we're talking about are row homes and townhomes, first-time home ownership opportunities, the kinds of things that my family experienced in the city, but has been out of reach for too long now. The change can be difficult. I just know that the change of doing nothing is going to be far worse for our city.
In that, in the other options, there are some who say that we have kind of an out-of-control vacation short-term rental program, that some of that can be brought online as available housing for purchase or to live in. What would your response be to that?
Well, we've done that. My predecessor spent the entirety of his 2 terms doing absolutely zero on this issue. I worked with Councilmember Jennifer Campbell in the City Council, and we passed appropriate, and I think strict rules on vacation rentals. The numbers have come down. Some of that stock has been returned to the market. But Carlo, even at its most aggressive projections, you're talking about a single-digit percentage of our overall housing inventory. Not enough to have the driving change that we need to have in order to bring down rents and make homes affordable again for people to purchase. So that's a component part of it, but really where we're going to see the most change is when we build more housing that everyday San Diegans can afford.
And that housing cost, that's the biggest bill for most San Diegans, but there are other ways that you might be able to help them out. What are other ways that you as mayor can impact the cost of living in the city of San Diego?
Well, I mentioned those just a moment ago, but I'll go deeper. Water rate increases. My administration has 10 votes at the County Water Authority, and we're using them not just to ask how to keep your water safe and reliable, but what does it cost? And Carlo, we continually have seen rate increases proposed that are in excess of what is necessary. And we've used our 10 votes to block those rate increases and making sure more money is in the pockets of San Diego ratepayers. We've created the San Diego Community Power Organization. This is a competitor to our existing utility. That creates competition that does reduce costs. And using things like our influence at Sandag to get rid of the mileage tax. That was something that was enacted previously. We worked hard to get that removed from our regional transportation plan, and we were successful in doing that. These are all ways, large and small, where we can put more money back in the pockets of San Diegans.
All right, let's move on to our next topic, which is one that's hit a little bit harder this year, the infrastructure. We know we saw the floods in January, what our stormwater system is lacking and the problems with that. So on the ballot is Measure E. It's a penny tax on every dollar spent in the city of San Diego. Estimates are anywhere from $400 to $500 million a year. Why is this a necessary measure? Because you've spoken out in support of it.
Yeah, I have, because Carlo, I've spent the first 4 years as your mayor going out and understanding the size of our infrastructure deficit. We looked at all of our asset classes, considered their condition, and then put a price tag to what it's going to cost to fix these things. And your viewers see it all the time. The roads that are crumbling, the dams that are inadequate, the OB pier that has now been closed. The signs of our infrastructure deficit are all around us. The dollar amount that we came up with is $9.3 billion. The city's general fund to run the city for a year is $2 billion. There's no way to belt tighten our way out of it. And by continuing to ignore this issue, it costs San Diegans even more in broken axles and flat tires on our roads, in the loss of economic opportunity when things like the OB pier are closed, in the hundreds of millions of dollars of water that we've had to flush into the ocean because our dams are over 100 years old and need to be rebuilt. A penny is a small investment that will actually save consumers, I think, more in the long run, and has the happy benefit of improving our quality of life, protecting our environment, and growing our economy. This is why I support Measure E.
You know, for people who are skeptical of some of that, they might point to, and I would ask, the flooding we saw, that storm channel, it wasn't the first time that there were major problems there. Why did we have to wait for this type of catastrophe we had this year before we put something like this on the ballot?
Well, we weren't waiting to do that. Carla, I worked with the Biden-Harris administration before the storms 2 years ago to get a $733 million federal grant to actually perform the work that we want to do to rebuild our storm channels. Most of those channels are decades and decades, if not over a century old. The neighborhoods around them have grown substantially over that period of time. There's no amount of infrastructure that would have addressed that storm on January 22nd. But I acknowledge that we need to do better. We were already attempting to do that. The problem, Carlo, is these kinds of projects take years, if not decades, to actually perform. One of the things that happened because of the storm, I issued an emergency declaration that untied my hands illegally. And as you saw, we cleared 18 miles worth of channels. And then in this year's budget, I put more money towards stormwater maintenance because we didn't have to do all of the clearing before. It's now clear we need to maintain it. That $733 million from our federal partners will allow us to rebuild critical structures. Most of that money will go in the Chollas Creek area. So we have known that this is a problem. We've been working in a general direction, but obviously this storm happened. And my fear, Carlo, is more will happen, which is why we're putting more money towards it and why we have Measure E on the ballot to help us do even more storm channel improvements.
These are some of the major infrastructure issues. One infrastructure issue that a lot of people mention to me is bike lanes. They wonder, are we spending too much money? Is this a luxury that we're spending this on? Why is it a priority?
I so appreciate you asking that question. I get it too. And I think what is fundamentally misunderstood in that situation is there's some belief that the bike money could go be used for fill in the blank, library hours, cut the lawns of the park. That is not the case. In most of the situation, what you're talking about is money that comes from SANDAG, money that the voters approved that could only be used for that purpose. So it's not fungible, it's not movable. I don't think these are luxury items though, Carlo. You may know we have an unacceptable level of deaths in our community from cyclists and pedestrians who are killed in crashes. Your safety is my top priority as mayor. And so we need to make these investments, not just because it's good for the environment and meeting our climate action plan goals, but because it literally will save lives. I think it's worth the investment. And again, importantly, most of the money that we're talking about here cannot be used legally somewhere else.
Different bucket from a completely different source.
Correct.
Last thing I want to ask on the infrastructure issue is Measure E, the way it's worded, the money goes to the general fund. Now, a lot of voters are skeptical when they hear that because they want to know why wasn't this designated specifically for infrastructure repairs and construction?
Well, this requires a vote of the people. And the way that our Measure E is drafted, it takes a 50% vote of the people, which means that I believe this will pass. At a lockbox, it creates a 2/3 requirement for passage. We've tried some of those in recent years. They've been unsuccessful. We're not going to keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. We're going to do what we know works. The general fund, Carlo, is where we pay for infrastructure. And I would tell you this year, despite the significant budget deficit we've had to deal with in the aftermath of COVID, we not only balanced our budget, but we put a record amount of money towards infrastructure, over $1 billion, the most ever. you can guarantee that this money will go to infrastructure, because even in the most difficult of budget times, we have doubled down on investing in our neighborhoods. But even at that over $1 billion this year, Carlo, it's still not enough. We need $9 billion. Measure E is how we fix this problem once and for all.
I can appreciate all the problems in front and how you laid that out on the trust issue. I just want to clarify for our viewers. So the biggest reason for Measure E being worded that way is simply that the hurdle for it to be a dedicated fund for infrastructure would have been a 2/3 vote, and you're just not going to bang your head against that wall.
Well, we have done that previously unsuccessfully. And I don't think San Diegans want to wait any longer for us to fix the damn roads. They want us to do it now. Importantly, I want to be very clear. All of the data that I have seen is that San Diegans will overwhelmingly support this measure. We have been polling on this matter for over 2 years. It is generally in 60% passage rate. San Diegans are hungry for change. This is how we give it to them.
All right, moving on to our third topic, another big one, easy to guess probably, homelessness in San Diego continues to be a very large problem. What do you say is the driving cause in San Diego for homelessness, and how would you address it?
Well, I wanted to tell you this is the most complex problem for which there is not a simple answer. But generally speaking, it's the high cost of housing. You know, we have more homeless people here than we do in communities that have lower housing costs. And it's not because we have more mentally ill people here or more addicted people here. It's because we have one-bedroom apartments that on average go for $2,500 a month. It is a complex issue. Addiction, divorce, job loss, mental illness, these are all contributing factors. But at the heart of it is that housing is so expensive that even working and middle-class people in this city struggle. You can imagine with someone that is as vulnerable as many of our homeless population, why they struggle in this environment. And that's why we're so passionate about building more housing. We all benefit when our housing inventory grows, not just those who are unsheltered, but again, the working and middle class of the city.
And what do you have to say to people who say, then why are we spending money on temporary fixes, things like tent shelters, these little tent cities that we're putting up in different parts of San Diego?
Because we need to get people off the streets now. Encampments are unsafe, unsanitary, both for the unhoused individual and for the broader community. And what we found with our safe sleeping sites is they are extremely popular. About 80% of the folks who are in those facilities tonight have never previously touched our shelter system. They're generally what we call service resistant. They decline offers of assistance. But this is a format that works for them. And it's not that they're just hanging out in a tent. This is where they get the wraparound services, where we triage their circumstances, address the underlying causes of their homelessness, and get them hopefully into permanent housing. We can wait 2 years or more to build more housing to get folks off the streets. But while they're lingering on the streets, they continue to deteriorate. Some of them die. Obviously, communities are impacted. Safety is a concern. We just can't wait to take action. We must do both at the same time. Get people off the streets into shelter and build the housing that ends their homelessness for good.
There are some who believe that any progress in metrics that we use for the homeless in the city of San Diego are skewed. They say that our encampment ban has simply pushed people out, pushed them into county land, state land, into other cities in San Diego. What do you have to say to those people?
I mean, I acknowledge the metrics are hard. This is a difficult population to quantify. But what I say to those folks is that no one was talking about displacement of homeless individuals for the roughly 40 plus years that the city of San Diego has been the only shelter provider in the entire county. And mind you, for your viewers to know, we have 18 incorporated cities in this county, but most have absolutely zero shelter despite all having homeless populations. The reductions that we've seen in downtown San Diego since the unsafe camping ban passed. Over 2,300 people enumerated in May of 2023. Fast forward today, the number is about 850. Those folks are, generally speaking, in the 900 plus additional shelter beds that we've created in the last 12 months. And some folks may have gone somewhere else, but the bottom line is that we are getting people off the sidewalk and into shelter and on a pathway to start their housing. And my call as mayor is to ask these other cities that also have homeless populations to house their homeless, to build the housing, to build the shelter, and stop relying on the city of San Diego's taxpayers to do it for them.
As you mentioned, very complex problem. It's not a one-size-fits-all. But that leads me to ask the Kettner proposal, the 1,000-bed proposed shelter. Do you have any second thoughts on that, getting feedback? Just the fact that people could worry that no one's going to want to go there because they don't want to be in that tight of a space with other people who may be dealing with mental health issues, drug addiction, et cetera?
No, I don't have that concern. And the reason is because our existing shelter system is extremely full, right? We are 90, 95, 98% occupancy. Some of those formats are very large shelters. There's some large congregate facilities. Some are non-congregate. We have a whole spectrum of offerings. But the point is, the people who are unsheltered do utilize these services. They are desirous of getting off the streets, and it's on us to build more shelter to do it. Carlo, this stuff is hard. I've seen the objections, but here's what I know for sure. Every time we've built a shelter, there has always been objections until it's built, and then people see that it operates successfully in a community and the number of encampments in that area are reduced. I expect nothing different with Kettner and Vine. As just reminder, we're still negotiating that arrangement. We're still working with the property owner to get a deal that I think is good for San Diego and its taxpayers. When and if we get that, I'll bring that back to the city council. But right now, we're still negotiating it. But the bottom line is, Carlo, we need more shelter, and I think this is one of the best ways to do it. It is an ideal location that I know will be well used by the homeless population, but not be in a way that I think will be overly impactful for the surrounding community.
So the last point of clarification, one thing you're saying to people is the sticker shock that you got from numbers that were thrown out initially, wait until you hear the final numbers.
Thank you for saying that. Yes, I've repeated this ad nauseum. Here's the deal. The city has a history of making bad real estate deals. And in those instances, often it was one hearing and done. I've done the exact opposite. I've learned from the mistakes of the past. And what we've done is bring this to 6 times to the city council for their consideration. What you and others, not you personally, what has been reported is the opening initial offer.
Right.
And I've operated in a transparent fashion to give that to the city council to get their feedback and go back to the negotiating table. We are continuing to do that. So the numbers that my opponent and others often like to phrase are not the current set of numbers. Okay. We're just going to make sure that we have a good deal. If it's not a good deal, I will walk away. I have options B through Z, other options to try and address this. But I do think this is an ideal location. And if it becomes a good deal for taxpayers, we will present it to the city council for their consideration.
All right, thanks, Mayor Gloria, for touching on our topics. My last question to you is just a straightforward one. Why should voters give you their vote to be reelected to be mayor of San Diego?
Well, look at what I've done for the last 4 years. Under the most difficult of circumstances, a global pandemic, a great recession, social and civil unrest, we have been able to successfully address those conflicts and challenges while simultaneously making progress on the key issues of our city, keeping crime low, fixing our roads, housing our homeless, and building more housing for working and middle-class San Diegans. I have the track record of experience under the most difficult of circumstances, and I believe we can build upon that. The foundation has been laid, but I'm not content. There's no mission accomplished here. I want 4 more years to take the experience that I have to get more wins for San Diego. I don't believe my opponent has the experience to do this work. I don't believe he has actual plans or solutions to the many problems that he points out. And I think importantly, he has no idea how to fix those problems. I'd love the opportunity to continue to represent my hometown and to take the years of experience that I have to make sure that we make meaningful progress in getting more people off the streets, fixing our roads, and making sure that we stay one of America's safest big cities.
Election day is right around the corner. Mayor Todd Gloria up against Larry Turner. Thank you for joining us and talking to our viewers, letting them know what you're all about as a candidate and as a mayor. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.